Love is in the air. Or is that decay? We're talking about horror romance at the Horror Movie Syllabus. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and downright notorious modern horror movies. If you're new, I hope you'll take a look at our introduction video. There's a link to that in the description below. It'll explain to you how the Horror Movie Syllabus works. But in short, the Horror Movie Syllabus takes a particular subgenre of horror and looks at 3 specific movies that represent that subgenre. Today, the subgenre we're looking at is horror romance. Now, if you look at the entire Horror Movie Syllabus, you'll see that there's an entire category devoted just to cross-genre films, and that is films that are horror and some other subgenre. And horror romance falls right into this category. They are both horror movies and romance movies. Now, a lot of the times when you have these cross-genre movies, the balance isn't quite right. And you'll get a little bit of too much of one and not enough of the other. We talked about this a little bit when we discussed horror comedy, that sometimes the balance isn't right and it's too funny or not funny enough. The same is going to be true here in the horror romance. At the end of the day, you know, their movies are about love, a love story. And hey, love can be scary, but does it really measure up to horror? Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit in the movies that we look at today. Now, the interesting thing when it comes to horror romance is that those two target audiences don't really have a lot of overlap. I think in the Venn diagram of those two audiences, they are almost independent circles, maybe just a smidge of crossover. The people who like romance movies and the people who like horror movies are generally not the same. So when you put these two genres together, it's a little hard to figure out who your target audience is sometimes. That said, a good horror romance, I think it defies the audience. It defies being pigeonholed for one particular type of person. And I think that we've picked a couple of movies that fully illustrate this idea. Controversy is about to come up. Oh, you'll see when we go into this, but not every movie is as universally loved. And I think in horror romance, you can kind of come up with that issue more than others because, again, those audiences are diverse. And so, unfortunately, diversity tends to devolve into kind of dislike. Like, oh, you like that and I don't, so therefore I can't like what you like. We'll talk about it. But in short, horror romance is something that exists. It's something that, when done well, can be really good. And even when it's not done well, it can be noteworthy or worth watching. So with that, let's go ahead and talk about them. Now, we're going to go ahead and, as usual, separate these into different levels, undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate levels. And in this case, I'm going to say that they are in ascending level of quality. So with all that said, let's go ahead and just dive right in. The first horror romance that we're talking about, our undergraduate level movie, is Twilight. Yeah, we're talking about Twilight. So if you were wondering why I was being a little cagey a minute or so ago, that's why. I know that this is a controversial choice. I know it. I know that there's probably a lot of you who are clicking dislike right now or unsubscribe. I hope that's not the case. But hear me out. Twilight is noteworthy. Whether you like it or not, it is an incredibly noteworthy horror romance movie. And the reason why is because of the impact that it had. For those of you who live under a rock, I'll explain a little bit about what Twilight is and why it might be controversial. Twilight came out in 2008, and it's the story about a teenage girl who falls in love with a vampire. And there's also a werewolf who's in love with her. So it has this wonderful vampire, werewolf, modern girl love triangle. It is generally not a good movie. It is widely decried by horror fans because of it not being a good movie and being kind of trash, to be honest with you. And in particular because the depiction of the vampires in the movie I don't really align with a lot of the typical vampire lore. They are not. They're not as scary as the typical vampire. They sparkle in the sunlight instead of catching fire, for example. There's a lot of issues with it, and people really, really, really dislike this movie. And it's fair. I'm not here to tell anybody they're wrong for disliking this movie at all. But the thing is, there's a tremendous amount of people who love this movie. And that's why it's making the list. And the reason why is kind of what we were talking about just a few minutes ago in the introduction. There is a huge group of people who love romance novels, romance movies, and they generally don't get into horror at all. But for Twilight, they did. And since Twilight, there's been a whole movement in like the romance novel genre of like supernatural romance, witches and ghosts and other vampire stories and werewolf stories. They call them shifters, like women who fall in love with men that turn into some sort of animal. A lot of fantasy, supernatural, and horror themes, romance stuff happens. Everybody basically chasing the tremendous amount of success that was Twilight. Everybody's chasing the Twilight phenomenon. But what has happened is it's opened a whole generation of people, a whole group of people up to horror that otherwise wouldn't have given it a chance. And that's why I wanted to bring it up here, because I think it's important to acknowledge the importance of Twilight in getting new fans to horror. Okay? So yeah, is Twilight bad? Yeah, it's basically it's basically a horror romance novel. It really wasn't a romance novel. In fact, my first exposure to Twilight was the book, not the movie. It was a phenomenon book. It was like a big hit, and I'd heard about it, but I didn't know much about it. But I knew it had something to do with vampires, and I love vampires. So my wife and I were going on a trip to see a friend of hers, and we were in the airport, and I'd forgotten to get something to read, and Twilight was at the bookstore. Cheap paperback book, bought it, read it on the plane. It's a quick, easy read. And it was fine. It was not great. The protagonist of the story is really kind of dull and uninteresting. But it wasn't bad. It held my interest enough on a plane flight at least. But it really was more of a romance novel than a horror novel. And it was interesting though, because when we got there, and I got to meet my wife's friend, two things that came up during the course of conversation were that she loves vampires and she loves romance novels. So I said, "Oh, you must love Twilight then." And she said, "What's Twilight?" Because she lived out of the country, and Twilight, I guess, hadn't hit where she lived yet. So I was like, oh, so you don't know what that is. I'm just going to take this book. I'm just going to leave it here for you, and you just let me know what you think. And I give this to her like right before we were leaving to come back home. And by the time we had got home, she had read it and had fallen in love with it. It showed the power of that book. It really was able to draw people in who aren't really horror fans per se, but were willing to give horror a chance, or really kind of could get drawn into the horror genre by the romance angle. And there was a lot of people that did. A lot of teenage or preteen girls who really loved Twilight. And mind you, this came out, 2007, so that's 13 years ago. Those girls are adults now, and they are much more likely to be horror fans than they were had Twilight not come out. And I think that's important. I think that's worth recognizing here. Now, am I recommending that you watch Twilight? Not necessarily. It's not as bad as people say it is, but it's not good. It is the kind of movie that if you have a few horror-loving fans and you got a bottle of something delicious that also has alcohol, it might be a fun watch. Kind of take a drink every time something ridiculous happens. You might have a good time with it. But it's not a particularly well-made movie, and that's the issue. Is that you may not like the romance aspect of it. You may not even like the alternate take on vampires. And those are legitimate things. But if you had made a good movie, a good quality movie, you maybe forgive some of those things. But the movie's not particularly well made. It's got some interesting ideas, but they don't really develop them well enough. A lot of people like to criticize the acting in the movie. I don't think the acting is bad per se. I think that the script is bad, and I think that these actors are actually quite good actors. Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson have shown themselves in other projects to be excellent actors. But their dialogue is horrendous, and the way they portray the characters is kind of ridiculous and maudlin and melodramatic and overwrought. But that really is true to the book. The movie is quite true to the book, for better or for worse. But yeah, look. I'm not saying you got to watch this movie. I'm not even saying that it's a must see for your horror education. But you should at least know about it and understand its impact in horror. It really drew a lot of new fans to the genre as a whole, and I think that's worth mentioning. I think it's worth being respectful towards. Make fun of Twilight all you want. Make fun of everybody who likes Twilight, but cut them some slack too, because you don't want to scare them away from horror. You want to bring them into horror. I've always said that we want to be inclusive to fans of horror. We don't want to tell people they're wrong or try to turn them off to the subgenres. We want to include them into the subgenres. We want them to try new things and try to embrace these different subgenres. So I think that Twilight is just one of those. I never make fun of a Twilight fan. Look, I'll tell you right now, the book is trashy. The movie is kind of garbage. It has several sequels. They did all the books into movies. The second movie is better than the first. It's actually not bad. I like werewolves, and it's about werewolves more than the vampires. It just gets really bad from there. But it's I don't think I've even seen all of them now that I think about it. But I'm just gonna go out on a limb and say that the last ones are not that good. Take my word for it. But at least respect the people who like them. Respect that they like them. They're allowed to like things that they like, and let them have that. And tell them that if they like Twilight, check out some of these better movies, better vampire movies, some of which we might be talking about soon, some of them that we've already talked about. Let the Right One In comes into mind as one that didn't make this list because I put it on a different list, but is an excellent horror romance. So show them better examples of the subgenre, and welcome them into it rather than deriding them or making fun of them. That's just my hope. But yes, hopefully you stuck around through the video long enough to get through the Twilight discussion. If you have thoughts on Twilight, by all means, share them in the comments below. If you can defend Twilight, by all means, please do. Everybody will be nice to you, hopefully. But let's hear what you guys have to say about Twilight. The next movie that we're looking at, our graduate level movie, is Warm Bodies. Now, Warm Bodies came out in 2013, and it is a zombie romantic comedy, or a zom rom-com, as they like to say. And it works. It's not a incredible movie, but it's a good movie. The premise of the movie is we follow a zombie who goes by the name R because he can't remember his name. And it's post-apocalyptic zombie outbreak. So zombies have already taken over the earth, and there are pockets of human survivors who are trying to survive the outbreak and fight the zombies off and survive. And R comes across a girl named Julie, a human who's still alive, and he rescues her from other zombies and falls in love with her. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to spoil the movie for you, but it is a thinly veiled Romeo and Juliet, as you might have guessed, just simply from the names of the characters. But it's got fun touches for a Romeo and Juliet retelling. First of all, setting it in the zombie apocalypse, that's a fun touch. And even little things like Julie's best friend aspires to be a nurse. And if you've read Romeo and Juliet, she has a nurse that is her confidant. Little touches like that I like because I'm a big Shakespeare fan, and I really like modern retellings of Shakespeare stories. That's kind of a sweet spot for me. So on that level, this movie worked for me quite a bit, even though sometimes it's a little ham-fisted. Like there's literally a balcony scene where the zombie R comes up to Julie's balcony, and I mean, it's a little on the nose, but it's fun. I had a good time with it. It's got some good gore in it from a zombie standpoint. It's not a bad movie, but it really is more of a romantic comedy. Two issues with the movie. One is this movie comes out in the glut of zombie movies. As you know, in the last 10, 15 years or so, there's just been a deluge, an avalanche of zombie movies. It's like the zombie movie apocalypse. There's just so many of them that it's overwhelming. And very few of them stand up from the pack. I would argue that Warm Bodies does stand up from the pack by virtue of being a Shakespeare retelling and by virtue of being a true romantic comedy. So it does differentiate itself enough, but it can get lost in the shuffle a little bit. And it's not that much better than a lot of the zombie movies that have come out. It's noteworthy for being a horror romance, but it's not too groundbreaking. The other issue that I'd say there is with the movie is that the bulk of the movie comes from the zombies' point of view. So we see, or we hear rather, his internal monologue, which is interesting. And it's got some funny jokes as a result of it. It's got some fun insight. It's neat to see a zombie apocalypse from the zombies' perspective. I like that, but narratively, it creates some issues because uh, the story has him able to be very cogent and coherent and articulate when it needs him to be, and not so much when it doesn't need him to be. It kind of serves the story. Plot wise, it's hard to explain how R's mind works and how his speaking works, how his motor functions work. That seems to just kind of come and go as the story needs, and that's if you're a little nitpicky like I can be sometimes, that can kind of take you out of the story a little bit. And it was a struggle for me. I was really trying to let that go and just kind of enjoy the story that was being told, but I kept having instances where like wait, before he could barely walk and now he can use a record player, things like that would be a little bit of a challenge for me, and that might be a challenge for you too. But if you can let that go, if you can get past that, it's a fun movie. It's a neat perspective. There is chemistry between the leads, and that's always key in a horror romance. It's something that a lot of people who complain about Twilight say is there's not a lot of romance chemistry between the leads in Twilight. There is chemistry here. Nicholas Hoult playing the zombie manages to be charming and undead at the same time. No small feat. It's got some good performances. It's cute. It's a cute movie while still also having gore and your typical zombie tropes into it. So again, in trying to take that romance audience and introduce them to horror, I could see Warm Bodies being a really good way to do this. You could take people who like a good romantic comedy, give them this movie, they'll find the charm in it, and yet maybe also go, the zombie angle is pretty interesting. What else you got? And then you can bring in some really good zombie movies. You can bring in like a 28 Days Later or a Dawn of the Dead or something like that. So I think it's a good gateway, a gateway horror movie, if you will, for people who like romance movies, women in particular, who maybe aren't quite so keen on horror. But even if you are not a romance fan, if you like zombie movies, this is one that's worth watching. It's funny, it's cute, it's got good leads, it's got some good gore into it, it's got some good action in it. It's a pretty well balanced movie. It's a good time. It's not a very long movie. It's not too deep. It's not too heavy. It's a fun movie. It's a fun watch. So if you've seen it, let us know what you think, and if you haven't, check it out and give us your thoughts in the comments below. And the last movie we're talking about today, our postgraduate level movie, is Spring. Now, Spring came out in 2014, and it was something of a critical darling. The critics really loved this movie, and I think it also has a kind of a cult following too. It never really hit big or mainstream, and when you hear about it, you maybe can understand why. So, if you haven't seen it, the story is a guy who's traveling. I think he's in Italy. Meets a girl there, falls in love with her. She's kind of mysterious, and without giving away too much, she's a monster. So he falls in love with a monster. And I won't say anything more than that because the movie is surprising and wonderful. It's beautifully shot, it's beautifully acted, and it's got a really touching, sweet story while also being a really great body horror movie. Like if you like body horror, if you like the kind of horror that talks about like your body being manipulated or changing or horrible things happening to it, Spring's gonna hit for you. It doesn't shy away from it either. It's got some gruesome stuff into it, but it really, really winds up being an incredibly touching and heartfelt movie. I would say that even if you're the hardest horror fan, give Spring a shot because maybe it'll melt your cold dead heart. Like, it's remarkable how much this movie hit for me. I don't want to spoil the ending for you, but it's incredibly sweet. It really is a truly romantic, loving movie with monsters, and the effects are great. By the way, it looks really great. On the one hand, it works as a little bit of a travelogue for Italy because it's just beautifully shot. It's just the places look amazing. Like these two people meet and they just have this beautiful, amazing, wonderful, charming date. Think like, and I think I might have mentioned this in another video. Think like Richard Linklater's Before Sunrise trilogy. Think like that kind of connection. These two people just having this connection and kind of falling for each other, and then throw like a Cronenberg style body horror into it. It sounds like it shouldn't work at all, but it works beautifully. We talked earlier about Twilight and some of the issues with that. One of the issues is that the horror and the romance always kind of seem a little bit at odds with each other. In this movie, they just blend perfectly. Like it really just kind of works well. Like this movie never feels like it's not a romance movie, and it never really feels like it's not a horror movie. They really are blending together so elegantly. I mentioned Let the Right One In a little while ago. And this movie is not like that movie at all, other than the sense that it's just gorgeous and it really just works so beautifully to tell this really wonderful story. So I feel like if you liked it, Let the Right One In, you would like Spring as well. I don't think it's necessarily going to be for everybody. It's a little bit slow moving. It's taking its time with the story, and if you're not charmed by the leads, you're gonna have a bad time probably. But I think it'd be hard to not be charmed by them. They are charming. They are interesting. The woman is very mysterious for a reason, but she really has a certain pathos about her. You really feel for her. You really kind of relate to one or the other of them, or perhaps even both for some of you. And I think that's what makes this so accessible and such a touching story. Can't praise it enough, really. Like I said, the critics loved it for good reason. It's got its fans for good reason. It never got mainstream, and I think it's just a little too complex or a little too hard of a sell for people. Like, I don't know how you would market this movie mainstream, but if you like romance, if you like horror, if you like monsters, if you like body horror, give it a chance and see what you think of it. Again, it may not be for everybody. If it's not for you, that's cool. Let us know what you think. I don't think you'll think you wasted your time watching it, but I'd like to hear what your opinion is if you didn't feel it. I'm cool with that. And if you've seen Spring and you love it, let us know. Endorse it in the comments below. Tell people why they should check it out. If I'm selling it too much, let me know. If I'm not selling enough, let me know. I do like Spring very much. It was one of those movies that came in pretty hyped, met the expectations. Really, really kind of a special movie. I'm always kind of glad that it's not more mainstream. I'm kind of glad that it's a little bit lesser known. It's like one of those little treasures that's kind of a hidden gem that not everybody knows about. So hopefully if you haven't seen it, you'll give it a chance. Check it out and let me know what you think. So those are the three movies we were discussing for our horror romance retrospective. And if you like horror romance, we're going to tell you a few extra credit movies that you can check out that maybe you would like as well. The first movie I'm going to mention is called Blood and Chocolate, and it's also kind of a a forbidden love kind of a love story. And I don't want to tell too much about it to spoil it. It's I think it's based on a young adult novel, but it is one of those. Young people fall in love, but it's kind of a love that shouldn't. It's forbidden. I'm not sure if I should tell you more than that because I don't know if the horror aspect of it is supposed to be a surprise or not. I don't think it is, but I'm not sure. So I'm just going to say there is a horror twist to it that works. Like the movie, it's probably geared more towards younger people. If you're a little bit older, if you're a little more cynical about love, this might not work for you. But I think it's fun. It's a fun movie. It looks pretty good. It's not the best effects or anything like that, but I enjoy this movie. It may be arguably more of a guilty pleasure kind of movie. Maybe hews a little bit closer to the Twilight type movie. It's much better than Twilight, but kind of a little bit more for that crowd than it is for like the Let the Right One In kind of crowd. But it's fun. It's worth a mention here. If you like horror romance, if you like Twilight, I'd definitely say check this one out. And if you like horror romance, give it a chance. See what you think. Let me know what you think. The next extra credit movie I'm going to mention is Crimson Peak, which is a gothic romance movie done by Guillermo del Toro. Came out a couple years ago. And this movie is beautiful. The story is fine. It's not the most original story. It's not the most interesting thing, ghosts and whatnot. But it's fine. It's serviceable, but it looks amazing. Like Guillermo del Toro, if you've seen any of his movies, you know he knows how to make a movie just look amazing. It's like a fairy tale, and Crimson Peak is no exception to the rule. It really is a gorgeous movie. The performances are good, if a little bit melodramatic, and I think that's intentional. The movie's got kind of a melodrama feel to it, and that works for the movie. Unfortunately, some of the CGI I'd say it doesn't hold up very well, but I felt that even when I first saw it in theaters that it didn't particularly fit so well. I would have liked to have seen Guillermo go a little bit more practical with some of the effects. That said, even the CGI that doesn't work that well, it's not horrible or anything like that. It's just, you can tell it's CGI. But the movie's just so lush and gorgeous. It's like a painting in a lot of ways. So visually alone, it's worth watching. And again, I don't think you'll be bored by the story. I don't think you'll be upset by the story or anything like that. It's not going to blow your mind, but it's good. It's definitely one to worth check out. And if you like Guillermo del Toro, you probably have already seen it, but if you haven't, check it out. It's a beautiful, beautiful movie. And the last extra credit movie that we're going to talk about in the horror romance subgenre is Only Lovers Left Alive, which is a vampire movie by Jim Jarmusch, and it is exceptional. This movie almost made the horror movie syllabus in several different subgenres, but it kept just getting edged out by other movies. So I've decided to include it here as extra credit because I do think that the romance in this movie is heartbreakingly awesome. It's got an incredible cast, including Tilda Swinton and Tom Hiddleston and the gone too soon Anton Yelchin. And it's a really interesting look at the love lives of vampires. There's a lot of movies that go into the vampires growing old together, living forever. But Only Lovers Left Alive really focuses on this. It's really kind of the crux of the movie, and the issues of love and relationships for vampires. And it's done so in just a really powerful way. It's a really cool movie that I don't know if a lot of people have seen this one. This one maybe has kind of gone under the radar for a lot of people. It's definitely not a mainstream movie by any stretch of the imagination, but it's really, really good. If you haven't seen it, you should absolutely check it out. Probably maybe the best movie that we've talked about on this video. And again, like just missed the syllabus. It kind of pained me to not put it on here. But let me make no mistake that it didn't make the syllabus proper, but it could have, it should have, and for some of you, it probably does make the syllabus. So definitely give it a chance, give it some love, tell other people about it if you like it. Tell people in the comments below if you've seen it. Tell people why you like it, because I'm pretty sure you do. If you don't like it, of course, tell us why, but I'm pretty sure you like this movie if you've seen it. It's exceptional. So check that one out if you haven't seen it already. So that's going to do it for today's video. As usual, I really appreciate you guys for taking the time to leave some comments about some of your favorite horror romance. If you want to leave some comments about defending Twilight or bashing Twilight, by all means do. Let's just be respectful to one another for our opinions, because as I said before, I don't want to scare anybody off. I want everybody to be heard and everybody to have a voice. But tell us what your favorite horror romances are, or if you just don't like the subgenre as a whole, if you just feel like romance has no place in horror, let us know about that too. Again, I'm looking forward to having some interesting conversations with you, and I think this subgenre in particular, people are going to have some opinions, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys say and kind of interacting with you guys in the comments below. So thanks again for being so proactive and prolific in your comments. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun. So with that, we're going to call it a day. Thank you guys for attending. Class dismissed.